From VoteDixon.com, this is the blog post, Whitehall Ward 1 Councilman Chris Rodriguez, a revealing indictment of his official record. Read by its author, Gerald Dixon. Part 1, The Record. As a preface, I wanted to point out, on Mr. Rodriguez's yard signs, his tagline is, Our City Councilman, a phrase that suggests some sort of collective, exalted leader. As such, then, this blog post offers up a counterpoint to that advertised notion. Chris Rodriguez is the current councilperson for Ward 1 here in Whitehall. I, Gerald Dixon, am running against him for that council seat he occupies. In the interest of winning the seat, besides offering up why I'm running and what my intentions are for the position, I also offer up this by-the-numbers glimpse of your sitting councilperson as a means of understanding who exactly you've elected time and again, and why that is not necessarily the best choice. I will present Councilman Rodriguez's record in 3 categories: his time in holding office and what seats he's held, his record as a legislator for the citizens he represents, and in attendance of those meetings. I will also offer up my thoughts on all 3 of these categories and an overall analysis at the end, both as a candidate seeking the office he holds and as an observant citizen. As a note, the numbers offered are what was available to me as of June 2017 and reflect 15 and a half years. Sometimes I speak of his time in office, though, given that by the time he finishes his current term, it will have been a full 16 years. The numbers you will see here were called from the official records kept by the council office of the city of Whitehall. I spent about 20 hours of beautiful spring days in the office this past June, combing through 16 years of paper records, legislation, minutes, attendance records, to compile the entire history of Mr. Rodriguez's time on council. Mary Frymark and the custodial gentleman who brought up dollies of boxes for me were a great help, and I thank them. A dissemination of the information you'll see here. There are 4 meetings a month with an occasional emergency meeting. 2 are in the room behind council chambers where various standing committees meet to discuss various business of the city, i.e., community standards and enforcement, and economic development, etc. This is where any discussion of these issues, as well as presentations and the introduction of legislation by council and others, are done. There is no ability for the public to weigh in on these meetings, although they're welcome to attend them. The other 2 are in the council chambers, where legislation is voted on, entities make public presentations, public hearings are held, and the mayor, auditor, and the like report to council with their officials' reports. This is also where council gives anyone who wishes to speak before them 2 3-minute opportunities called poll public. That which is brought before them for a vote are generally 2 things: ordinances and resolutions. While ordinances are generally local law enacted and enforced by the proper authorities, resolutions are less permanent than ordinances and generally cover acknowledgments of people or events and not really anything which affects the general public. Certainly not an enforceable law per se. So, ordinances are obviously something which would have greater impact on the citizens. Resolutions, not so much. When Mr. Rodriguez first entered into office, the salary was $4,000 per year, about $83 per meeting. Between 2014 and 2016, the salary was $4,600 a year, about $96 a meeting. In 2017, the pay went up to $5,200 per year, or about $108 per meeting. Holding office. Announced his first run for the Ward 1 council seat prior to the events of 9/11. Total years on council, 16 years. As at-large councilman, 4 years. As Ward 1 councilman, 12 years. Elections ran in, 4 opposed, 1 unopposed. Longest-serving elected officials currently at Whitehall City Hall with no breaks in service by the end of 2017. Number 1, Councilman Chris Rodriguez, 16 years, longer than Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Number 2, Auditor Mayor Kim Maggard, 15 years. Number 3, Councilman President of Council Jim Graham, 14 years. Number 4, Councilman Bob Bailey and Wes Cantor, 10 years. Number 5, Councilman Auditor Dan Miller, 8 years. This despite term limits being affirmed and mandated 3 times by the voters. Mr. Rodriguez's movements are as follows. First elected to Ward 1 in November 2001. Re-elected to Ward 1 in 2005. Abandoned Ward 1 seat in 2007 in order to run for at-large, as it staggered from ward elections. Won at-large, Bob Bailey appointed to Mr. Rodriguez's empty seat. Decided not to run again for his at-large seat and instead ran for auditor in 2011 and lost. Bob Bailey had abandoned his Ward 1 seat to run for at-large, which he won, and so his empty Ward 1 seat needed an appointee. Guess who was appointed? None other than Chris Rodriguez. Mr. Rodriguez ran for Ward 1 councilman again in 2013, unopposed by the way, where he of course won, and currently sits. I maintain that the spirit of staggered elections between wards and at-larges are to give a breather to elected officials so that they take a break from service as they are supposed to do per the city charter, i.e. finish no more than 2 terms and not run again for 2 to 4 years. This allows the offices to open wide to receive applicants instead of one person, by the way of power and dominance of incumbency, to keep a lock on the seat. It also keeps the power more distributed amongst the citizenry than all in the hands of just a few. People like Chris Rodriguez and Bob Bailey and Wes Cantor circumvent this rule by abandoning the position they just ran for 2 years prior, that the voters entrusted them to serve the entire term, in order to hop on a new position and therefore never lose a seat, never lose power, and make it imbalanced and unfair for any other out there who wants a chance to serve their civic duty. As well, it is a thumbing of their noses to citizens who have 3 times said they want term limits for elected officials. Apparently, these guys think the spirit of that voter mandate doesn't apply to them. Legislation. Ordinance labeled as requested by Chris Rodriguez in 16 years. 6. Of these 6, 3 of them had up to 5 other people request it, meaning Chris Rodriguez only requested 3 ordinances in his 16 years as the citizens' legislator. One of his sole requests was for the Adopt a Basket program for the flower baskets on Yearling, and one other was to institute no parking on Beechwood Road between Etna and Virginia Circle. Average time for Chris Rodriguez to solely introduce an ordinance on council? Once every 5 years. Resolutions labeled as requested by Chris Rodriguez in 16 years. 4. Of these, one was honoring Beechwood ambassadors, another recognized heroes and neighbors, another recognized the Shell station at Broad and Hamilton. While nice things to recognize and honor, this is not anything that couldn't be accomplished by anyone else occupying the seat. Average time for Chris Rodriguez to introduce a resolution on council? Once every 4 years. Any ordinance or resolution requested by the entirety of council I never counted. It is only Mr. Rodriguez's record, solely motivated and pursued, that I'm interested in focusing on here. Yes votes by Chris Rodriguez, 1,502. No votes by Chris Rodriguez, 18. Mr. Rodriguez dissented only 1% of his entire time on council, a mere fraction of the time. A third of that fraction was in agreement with everyone else, 5 times. He only stood away from the pack 0.50%, or half of 1% of his entire time on council. This is important because I maintain, after watching Mr. Rodriguez for 6 or more years, that he is more a seat filler and yes man with a pack mentality than anything else. Not every piece of legislation that has been passed has been worthy of a yes. 18 of over 1,500 things is a very low number. It suggests that Mr. Rodriguez is not an individual, but rather part of a collective, and yet he is an individual who represents a specific ward and is their voice first and foremost. One has to question whether this disparity is an indicator of someone that simply goes along, as opposed to someone who stands alone, if necessary, and does what he has to do to buck others in order to properly represent and fight for his constituents. I claim it shows him as the former and not the latter. Attendance. Being that there are only 48 official meetings for council members to attend to in a calendar year, it can be easy to start racking up too many absences. In doing my research, there were so many levels of absence. How many absences were too many, and what was an acceptable number? People get sick, people have schedules and such, all of which are understandable. The average time off, per the record, is 5 times a year or less. I estimated then that a fair number to excuse representatives' absences was 6, outside of illness, before it became a rightful issue for those they're representing, those of whom they should have to answer to. So then, here is the record. Number of times Chris Rodriguez missed an entire meeting, 138. Remember, there are only 48 meetings a year. Number of years Chris Rodriguez went beyond 6 absences in a year, 8. The number 1 title holder of worst attendance by a councilperson in the last 16 years, out of 21 councilpersons, Chris Rodriguez. Number of spots Chris Rodriguez holds in the top 10 worst attendance records in a single year by councilpersons, 6. Number 1, Chris Rodriguez, 25 absences. Number 2, Chris Rodriguez and Mike Shannon, 22 absences. Number 3, Zach Woodruff, 21 absences. Number 4, Chris Rodriguez and Mike Shannon, 16 absences. Number 5, Mike Shannon, 15 absences. Number 6, Mike Shannon, 13 absences. Number 7, Chris Rodriguez and Bob Bailey, 12 absences. Number 8, Bob Bailey and Wes Cantor, 11 absences. Number 9, Chris Rodriguez and Mike Shannon, 10 absences. Number 10, Chris Rodriguez and Jim Graham, 9 absences. Best attendance, Leo Knobloch, only 6 meetings missed in his entire time on council. Amount his absences averaged over 15 years, over 6 times a year, have cost the taxpayers $4,296. Amount of meetings Chris Rodriguez has missed due to absences beyond a 6-meeting norm, 46 meetings, or nearly 1 full year. That is the end of Part 1.